All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. Today we're going to talk about how to get rich, episodes 3 and 4. So, with me today, I have the co host for the series, Rachelle Siebke. You met her on last week's podcast. And if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen. It's a good one. And today we have an additional special guest for the episode, Natasha Tekeste. So, Natasha, so glad you're here. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and chat about all things having to do with these episodes, man. There's so much to dive into. So, for people who don't know me, I'm a money mindset coach, and I will work with women or people socialized as women who want to earn more money. So, I help them shift their beliefs around money and wealth so they can leave the drama behind and really focus on actually doing the work that they love and want to do. So I really teach people how to love the money they have and then also love the process of earning and creating more. So that's a little bit about me
I
and what I
love
do kind of in my coaching business. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, when Rochelle said, I have the perfect person to come onto the show, and I was reading about you and I started listening to some podcasts with you, I'm like, yes, this is the perfect match. So, Rochelle, thank you for the intro and bringing us all together.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for reaching out, Rochelle. You were fantastic in following up and getting me on the podcast. So I really appreciate it.
yeah. I want to add to here. Natasha was my money coach twice. So we worked through the first time a very specific, like me wanting to earn more money. And it was sort of like bringing up a lot of like worthiness and value and shame. And then I had a little bit of a break. And then I came back and I was like, you know what? I want to work on this time is like reigniting my love for money. Like I'm good with money and all the things that are like fun about money for me, because I was sort of derailed by trying to create more money for myself, that I wasn't enjoying the things that I was already good about with money. So I really I have a lot to thank Natasha for in that regards too. So
Oh, well, that's so kind of you to say. And you are absolutely just such a good friend, and we're so amazing to work with. So I love you dearly.
Well, I was thinking we could just like get right into it. I mean, the show, if even if you haven't watched, I actually think you can get a lot out of this podcast. I've heard from a lot of the listeners. They're like, you know what? I didn't even watch the show, but I just listened to the recap and I got all the things I needed. So, on these episodes 3 and 4, we see some of the returning people we met in episodes 1 and 2, Amani and Matt, Danelle and Monique and Natalie, and we have a few new faces, Sophina and Frank. So we have a bunch of topics today. Hopefully we'll get through a bunch of them. And I think we're just going to kick right off. Natasha, you had such a good point that just blew my mind about our relationship with money. So do you want to take the first one here?
Yeah, definitely. So in the episode, I think it was episode 3, Ramit says people use money to hide deeper truths in a relationship. And specifically, he was talking about Matt and Amani and their kind of progress along the show. And that's where that came from. And I think this hits the nail on the head because our relationship often with money tells us a lot about our relationship with ourselves. So, how we talk about our money, how we treat our money is a reflection of how we talk about ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we show up for ourselves. And I think people don't necessarily realize that it is that reflection. And I think when that happens, it can be super mind-blowing for people because a lot of us, before we even start to dig deep into our relationship with money, we're not treating it very well. We're not respecting it very well. And I think it mirrors kind of ways that we're maybe not respecting ourselves.
Yeah, I always think about these things first for myself. Like when I was reading this, I'm like, ooh, how does this reflect my relationship with myself? And there was this moment where I was walking today where I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to look at that. And I was like, okay, I should probably look at that. So I think that, I think especially here too is I get a lot out of this and just reading this. And I've worked a lot on my relationship with food and how that relates the relationship with myself. So now I can see through this, especially what you were saying, Natasha, like, oh, this is probably a next step for me to look at how those parallel, because I never really thought about it in that way before. Just like, our like everything you were saying there, like it was really meaningful for me to read that.
I think people often think money is about money, and like the way they talk about it, the way they spend it is about it, but it's so much more and so much deeper than that. It has nothing to do about the money, and we saw a really good example of that with Matt and Amani, where Amani went into this thinking it was just going to be like Excel spreadsheets or just filling out templates. And she thought it was just going to be focused on the numbers, and it had nothing to do about the numbers. In reality, it had to do with their relationship to each other, how they were respecting each other, how they were respecting each other's roles in the relationship and showing up for each other. And that is so much more powerful than how much money you're spending on, X, Y, and Z in your life or whatever, right? It's like, how are you valuing this other person and talking to them and speaking to them and connecting with them, I guess, and connecting with yourselves through that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to some extent that really surprised Matt and Amani. I think they're probably like, whatever, we make a lot of money. We're just going to learn some tools here. This is going to be great. And we can see from the jump, it was a lot more than that. And they both speak a lot about feeling powerless around money. And I mean, you see that play out in their relationship too. It's like they love each other. You could tell that, but they've somehow along the way stopped knowing how to talk to each other and really communicate. And it seems that like their issues around money seems to be fueling that quite a bit.
And I think they
Uh,
stopped understanding each other or seeking to understand each other. That's what really came out to me, was that they were so focused, I think, on defending themselves or so focused on their own position that they weren't able to put themselves into the other person's shoes and the other person's perspective and understand where that person might be coming from. And that is so powerful and so important in our relationship, whatever relationships we're in, to be able to empathize and see where the other person is coming from, even if we don't necessarily agree. And I think you talked about this last time, Rachelle, in the last episode, where you talked about those repair conversations and being able to maybe not agree with someone, but still empathize and make them feel heard, and as though you understand and validate what they have to say.
Mm. Yeah, and I think in the episode 3 where they sort of switch roles, right? And Amani is at home working and she's got the kids in her lap and she's like, she's doing a great job with the kids, but also she's like, oh my gosh, this is a lot harder. And I would actually rather work than have to like try to manage the household and the kids. And so I was just so happy to see that the way that they came together in this episode, because of the first couple of episodes, they weren't able to get through a single conversation without walking out. And I really love that what brought them back to the table was doing the numbers homework. And so the way that I work with my clients is very practical and tactical and hands-on. But what I think about with money in those spreadsheets is that it brings up communication. And so many of my clients are like, I want to work on money mindset, but also I keep avoiding it in my self-coaching because I can, right? It's like there's so many things to coach yourself on, but when you're doing the numbers, when you're doing the spreadsheets, it will come up naturally. And when you're willing to come to the relationship to yourself or to communicate with your partner, that's when we start really getting the richness of what's behind what's happening.
Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. I think with money and money like issues, you need to be able to face them to bring everything up. But so many people aren't even willing to take that first step to even look at them. And we saw that with Matt and Amani because they had all these unopened bills kind of like hiding in the mailbox or hiding in the corner. And that is such a common thing for so many of us, right? We just don't want to deal with it, and we'd rather just keep it away because then we don't think that we have to face the negative emotions. Oftentimes that's shame and guilt and self-judgment by not looking at it. But the reality is that, and I loved Ramit and how he approaches, like, look at it and then you could come up with a plan, and notice how that's not like shame and judgment focused. That's so much more forward thinking focused. And it to me shows a level of self-compassion. Like, it's happened. it's okay. What we can do now is work on fixing it, work on coming up with a plan and helping to take care of ourselves and nurture ourselves through this, rather than making it a shame, blame game or something like that.
Yeah, and there's definitely those moments of repair. In the moment we were talking about her wrangling the children and going, "Wow, this is really hard for people." That must have been so rewarding for Matt to watch, just to be acknowledged in that way, and to be acknowledged when they were looking at their internet bill and she's like, "Wow, I didn't realize that Matt noticed the extra service fee here." And maybe he was too nervous to bring it up because that wasn't his domain, and now he's been invited in. And so just their whole body language changed throughout. Like, you can tell they'd been doing a lot of work on their own outside of the view of the cameras, just to start coming together. Because at the end of the day, it really does seem like they wanted to work together and they just needed some sort of path. And just having something tangible to work on together helped facilitate that. And it was good to see. I love to see it.
Yeah, it's almost like I think that their walls kind of came down, like their defense mechanisms came down. And once Ramit was able to help soften that, then they could actually connect with each other and connect with their love for one another, instead of just like this superficial, whatever it was, like nitpicking or judging or blaming or fighting and arguing, like that lack of respect. They were able to move past that and find the true love that they actually do have and have generated for one another. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely cool. You had brought up a good point in this document that we all worked on together. Um, where Ramit had said to Matt, Matt wants to get a job. And Ramit had said, "Oh, I think this will naturally change the dynamics of the relationship in a positive way." Natasha, you had written, "I'm not sure if I agree. I actually felt the same way as you, that just changing the circumstance of him working, I didn't think that would necessarily naturally change it, but I'm curious to hear your point of view on that and why why you thought that as well."
Yeah, I that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because if they have a base level right now with how they're functioning, it's through essentially a lack of respect and a lack of acknowledgement for how hard each other is working and how hard Matt is working as the stay-at-home parent. And just as a little like tiny side note and caveat, I currently am kind of, my job is a stay-at-home mom. Like, I've on maternity leave, I just have a baby. And so it has really opened my eyes to how hard this work is. Like, I would say I've never worked so hard in my life as like staying home with a baby and taking care of my child. And so I can really empathize with Matt's position when he's like, "This is harder than any job I've ever felt." I'm like, "Yep, I hear you. I'm living that every single day." And so I think that like Ramit suggesting that Matt get a job and generate some income, I think that inherently is devaluing the work that he is doing. And it's kind of buying into that stereotype that homemaking, taking care of your children, whatever it is, that isn't as valuable as working. Whereas so many people who I know that have chosen to stay at home for however long have all kind of validated for me too that this is much harder than maybe some of the freedoms of getting to like leave your house and go to work and things like that. So I think that, like you said, Lynn, the changing the circumstance of now Matt going out to maybe earn some income for the family, I don't know if that's going to help if they don't change their attitudes towards one another and their valuing of one another, because you're just adding another complicated situation where you're managing childcare. So there's something else now in the mix that might add additional frustration and complication and conflict in the relationship.
Yeah, Rachelle, I'd be curious to hear what you thought about that scene.
100%. I agree that changing the circumstance is not going to change anything if they're not connecting and seeing each other and respecting and again, it's like that connection. I also had something that really rubbed me the wrong way about the advice that Ramit had around splitting their, I believe he calls it the conscious spending plan. And what they did was, I loved that it was like, let's make sure that each of you get a percentage that is yours, What I didn't love is when he asked, what are you going to do with it? Matt said, I'm going to save it for an emergency fund and I'm going to maybe make some investments. And Amani said, I'm going to use it for my guilt-free spending. So what I recommend is that they both get guilt-free spending, and the investing and the emergency saving is joint. That is partnership goals. That should not be coming out of the 5%, that, especially knowing that Matt has not had his own guilt-free spending for this whole time. I didn't love that. And I don't think Matt did either, because I don't know about you two, but I noticed his eyes were like, kind of, he looked a little bit disappointed when she said she was going to use it for guilt-free spending.
Yeah. Yeah, his response tells me he still maybe doesn't feel super safe with the money in their family, because if he's putting it into savings, I'm assuming it maybe goes into a separate account the way that they have it split up. There might be some aspects there where he's just like, you know what? I think I need to like set aside a little bit more over here. So, yeah, I'd be curious to see what actually happens there if he does end up getting a job, because I don't know at any point if Ramit actually asked him like, "Hey, do you want to get a job? Do you want to not be a stay-at-home dad?" I just think that Matt's thinking the only way he can fix their relationship problems is if he brings in money and he'll be respected in a different way. So the points that you both of you were making was just like, that's very hard work to stay at home. I mean, Natasha, you know this firsthand. You're doing it firsthand. And I think that Matt is thinking that like this is the only way to change the dynamic of their relationship, when maybe there's a different way. And I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he does love staying at home. It doesn't really want to get a job, but doesn't see any other way. They don't really they don't really get into that part as much.
I know Ramit did ask him that question. I recall because I was watching for it too when they were starting to talk about him getting a job. And so Ramit did say, do you want to get a job? And Matt said yes. But he didn't really probe into it any deeper, and they didn't really explore his desires much more than that. But what I did kind of pick up on is I just think Matt has a lack of confidence in himself and his abilities. And I think that comes through with what he said during the like, do you want to get a job conversation, which was that I don't know if I'd be able to like keep up with our lifestyle, or the lifestyle Amani has set up for us, if I was to be the sole income earner and something was to happen to her. And I also think his like lack of confidence in his abilities shows up with his 5% and how he's choosing to invest and save it for an emergency fund rather than actually truly have guilt-free spending. And so I think when people don't have a lot of confidence in themselves, that is how it's almost like a scarcity drive, or it's like kind of like, oh, we got to keep, like they don't trust their abilities to earn more, to create more, to continue to like build their wealth over a long period of time. It's almost like shorter term thinking. And I'm not suggesting that an emergency fund or investments aren't important. I think they're very important, but so is like a bucket of money that you can spend freely. It doesn't have to be a ton of money, but a bucket of money that you allow yourself to spend on whatever it is that you truly want to spend it on.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I don't know how much more they're featured on the series. I do know that on Ramit's podcast, he does have follow-ups with all of the people on the show. So I'd be curious to see where they're at today. And I'm just so curious to see like, hey, what happened with him getting a job? What happened there? And just to follow their story through, because now I feel like I'm very invested in their lives. I'm like, I want to know what happens next. So any last thoughts on Matt and Amani before we move on to Safina?
Yeah, I thought one of the things that was really important about their transition through like changing the relationship was when Amani was reflecting back on her childhood, and she was saying like, I've never seen an equal partnership, right? And so in the beginning episodes in 1 and 2, Ramit asked, do you trust him? And she said no. And this is not the same as the other couple where the Danelle and Monique, who I love the way that they interact together. But that situation is actually Danelle does impulsively spend more than they have agreed upon. In this situation, she just said no, she didn't trust him, but she didn't say why. But I think that it comes more from that I've never been in or seen an equal partnership. And so to me, that was really much more transformative than any job change or situation could have brought them.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. It's like if we don't see modeled to us what healthy looks like, we're just going to keep doing the things that we do. Natasha, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's such a valid point. If we don't see it modeled to us, we're either going to just make up something that isn't serving us, or we'll have to try and figure out a way that works for us. And I'm really proud of Amani and Matt and how they were able to kind of like, even though maybe they didn't, Amani specifically didn't have that modeled to her, it's like it shows you that change is possible. You don't have to stay stuck in the ways that you created for yourself when you didn't have a better option. You are able to, if you're willing to get vulnerable, I guess, and willing to be open and see what else might be on the other side, you can actually create a better connection and deeper relationship. And I think that's kind of the power there, is like, it doesn't, because I think so many of us sometimes think like, well, my parents had a bad relationship with money, or I didn't get to see healthy money habits or whatever. And that is valid. And, I'm sorry that that happened and I wish better for people, right? But also we can create change in our lives, even if we didn't have that solid foundation, how we grew up. And I think that is the takeaway that's so powerful here, is that there can be positives, even if the situation was negative to start.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to be really clear, I'm not saying that we have to repeat our processes, but that without awareness, we often will unintentionally repeat the old processes. And so when we can have awareness and bring them out, and everybody can look at them on the same table, right? She can start being aware of where she's coming from. And Matt can also then again meet her with that, oh, I see you, I hear you, I understand where this is coming from. Let me show you, let me communicate to you that I am trustworthy, that I'm not this repeat of what you've experienced in the past.
Yeah. And I think like that hits the nail on the head, the like willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to have awareness around it, because you really do see a softening from both of them of just kind of like, oh, okay, if I can just take a step back here, kind of see how things are going. It's really beautiful to watch because, to both of your points, like we're not stuck in the way that we operate. And I think that's been the most transformative thing about getting into life coaching, is just seeing the way that you can move the needle in that way. And just even watching this show, it's like I think every single person moves forward in one way or another. We watch these shows, we see these huge makeovers on different shows, and you're like, oh, you should go from zero to like perfect. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like for them, just being able to acknowledge where they're both coming from, that is moving the needle. And that's what's going to build their lifelong relationship together, or however long they're together, when it comes to money and when it comes to working together on their goals. Yeah. Shall we move on to Sofina? So, Sofina is our 27-year-old single gymnast. She has purchased a condo with an HOA, and a lot of her storyline is really about her journey to buy this condo and how proud of it she is, but then also kind of being, in this reality check moment with Ramit, realizing that the amount that she currently make doesn't necessarily support all of her goals. A lot of it is going to her housing. A lot of it's going to these HOA fees that she didn't really realize were going to be there when she went into this, and just trying to navigate what it looks like to live in this decision that she's made to have this condo. And also the other point here is that her condo does not have hot water and has not had hot water for about 8 months. So one of the very first scenes that we see with Sofina is Ramit walking her through how to actually send an email and communication to the people of the HOA to be very direct with them on getting her hot water turned back on. Very uncomfortable for Sofina to see. Natasha, what did you think about this scene?
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting because it shows us so much of how women are socialized. Like, she talks about how for her, she wants to be a nice person, and she'd rather be a nice person than be direct or aggressive. And I love that she used the word aggressive there, because being being direct and asking for what you're paying for isn't aggressive. That's not it. There maybe is an aggressive way to go about it, but the email that Ramit kind of coached her through was by no means aggressive. It was direct. It listed some facts. Maybe it was assertive. I don't even know if it would be called assertive. Like, it was a pretty cordial email, and I just think that is so telling, because like, she would rather subconsciously, I don't know if it's necessarily consciously, when you like, maybe she's not aware of it, but would rather have cold showers for 8 months plus, we don't know when that's going to resolve itself, than to approach someone on a board and ask them to do what she's actually been paying for. And she's paying really high fees, like $500 plus for these HOA fees. And she's been living with cold water without, I don't think she's even getting responses. Like, I think they're just disregarding her and not taking her seriously. And it's like, well, why is it more important for her to be quote unquote nice to people in this situation than to be nice to herself? Because really, being nice to herself would be resolving the situation so she could have like a beautiful, warm, cozy shower in her house, right? And she's not freezing. And she's like an athlete, so I'm sure she's taking showers often, or maybe inconveniencing herself and showering at the gym. But like, it's just like, why is it more important to be, I don't know, to not inconvenience strangers or to not make strangers uncomfortable, but I don't even know how uncomfortable, them having to do their jobs would make them, versus like her own needs and what's important to her. Like, I just think that is there's so much there to unpack. So that was kind of my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, if this is happening with the HOA, very likely it's happening in other areas of her life too. So this is also one of the things I love about this, is that like he's walking her through it, showing her how to send a direct message, probably going to help her in many other areas of her life. It's just that you have to be willing to feel uncomfortable if you're used to just taking the back seat and just being like, you know what? No, I don't want to bother anybody. I'm just gonna suffer through this. I'm sure as a gymnast, she has endured a lot of pain in life. So maybe she's just like, whatever, I can do a cold shower. Um, but it's that she would have to be willing to feel uncomfortable in order to approach people in these ways moving forward. And the more that she can do this, and the more that she can like sit with that emotion, the more she can, learn to be direct. But it does come down to like that conditioning that she's used to growing up, and just realizing that there is another way of going about things, but maybe she just didn't realize she had that option.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting is, as a high performance athlete, I'm sure she's very used to feeling uncomfortable in her body and experiencing uncomfortable situations, because I think she mentioned she's gotten a gold medal before, and she was like a gymnast for 15 plus years. So it's not that she can't and doesn't have the skills to experience discomfort in her body. It's just like, in this area where it comes to asking for what she wants to improve her own life, or I guess just have one of her basic needs met that she's paying for in her house, it's like she hasn't necessarily developed those skills. And I kind of question if it's a lack of like feeling safe, right? Like, if we don't feel safe in ourselves, then we're not going to ask of other people, because we're not sure how it's going to be taken, what if we're going to be taken seriously. And I kind of question if has to do with, like, she looks really young, she has like a very fun personality, she seems like awesome, but if that maybe gets her brushed aside and like not taken seriously, and she hasn't necessarily learned how to speak up for herself in a confident way and ask for what she wants.
Yeah. Rochelle, what do you think?
I think that's such a good point to just go back one point what Natasha was talking about. Like, it's not like she doesn't know how to handle discomfort in her body, but we normalize what discomfort in our body is when we're physically enduring a sport or something like that. And we do not normalize that our emotions are also just physical discomforts, that they will come and they will pass. And as Natasha was saying, like when we know that we are safe through any discomfort that we have emotionally, then we can experience them differently. But it takes, again, some awareness and some support for ourselves and some normalization of the fact that discomfort from our emotions is not a bad thing, and that we can endure it just as much as we can. I'm sure the blister she has on her hands from those parallel bars, right?
I love
Yeah.
that. I think that's, yeah, so valid. The other thing I kind of just wanted to mention with it, and I think is interesting, is that we know she's a woman, but I think she's also either Black or Black biracial. So there's race coming into play here too, right? So she has multiple intersectional marginalized identities here. And so we know that people who live in different marginalized identities in society don't always feel comfortable like speaking up, having their voice heard, being seen. And for myself, for people who don't know me, I'm also Black biracial. And so I have that lived experience of often being, a minority in a minority setting. And so it makes me wonder, I'm like, well, what is the ethnicity of, for the majority of the HOA members who are actually the ones looking into her issues, right? Like, is she being discounted not only because she's a young woman, but also because of her race as well? There's so many different facets of it that can come into play when we're talking about individuals and their socialization.
Yeah. If she was your client, how would you help her, Natasha, like work through this?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I think first off, I would be curious to understand why it's important for her to be nice. Like, what does nice mean to her? Why does she need to be nice? What's her relationship with being nice to other people? Like, why is that something that is more important than addressing the hot water issues? So, I would just kind of want to understand what's going on there, because I think that will give us more information and more context for why she views having a direct email conversation as aggressive, and why she views it as something she's not yet comfortable doing. So that's kind of where I would start with it. What about you, Rachelle? Where would you go?
Yeah, 100% the same. I would do a little combination of the way that Ramit did, was like, okay, let's write the email together, right? If you're having some hurdles to it, let's do that now. And then asking the questions, we would come up with, okay, this is what you're thinking is going to happen. Why is that? What does that bring up for you? And then we can have a more direct, like, vision into what it is that is leading her to, again, it's never your fault if somebody dismisses you, but what is the thing that leads you to the point where you begin dismissing yourself, right? There's this part where she's like, well, I don't know, I've sent probably 20 messages, I guess it's not going to matter how many messages I send. And so, yeah, I'm asking the questions and getting to the point where, like, okay, what is it in here that is leading you to also dismiss yourself? It's never your fault when somebody else dismisses you, but what can we do to reconnect, right? To the awareness that, oh, it is okay for me to continue to ask for hot water, which is like a pretty basic necessity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so many good points there. And I think moving further on that, when she talks about like Ramit, when he's like presenting her with ideas of like, okay, well, do you want to keep the condo, sell the condo? One of the first things that she says when she's in conversation with her mom is, but what would people think? And so that is very much like top of mind to her. Like that would be something that she would feel like she would have to explain to people, and that she would be seen in a particular way, probably as a failure, I think she mentions along there. And so I do think if maybe I listened to her podcast episode with Ramit that she does end up staying in the condo. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler, but it'll be interesting to see what her evolution looks like having to work through these things, because it's the hot water today, it's something else tomorrow, and it could be that these small things help her to work through some of these patterns that she has in her life.
And I just wanted to, like, you mentioned her mom. I just want to say, like, so much appreciation for the relationship that they have. To see them sitting, to see her asking, like, please just help me make the decision. And her mom saying, no, I can't do that. Like, this really is your decision. And it really is for you to make that decision. And she says, like, oh, it's so much easier when somebody else will tell me what to do. And I do think that that is the thing that will really be a big part of her growth throughout the series.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to be one of the hardest things as a parent when your child is in their 20s and they're making these big decisions and you just want to say what they should do, and yet knowing that that's not going to be the thing that actually helps them and watching them suffering. Like, I can't even imagine. That must be so hard.
I'm living that even right now with a 1-year-old where he's like learning how to walk and learning how to, move upstairs and stuff. And I can't just like jump in every single time I see him kind of like stumble. It's like, of course, he's safe and we have gates and stuff, but it's also good for him to like learn his own boundaries and make mistakes and figure things out on his own. So I'm so glad you brought up that point, Rachelle, because that really resonated with me too. I love that the mom didn't just like come up with a 10-part plan for fixing her daughter's life and situation. And she really just supported her, and she was that like safe parental figure for her, but encouraged her to make the decision herself and supported her through that. And I just thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I love seeing examples of that on different TV shows. Actually, in The Bachelorette last season, we saw that with the mom and daughter relationship too. Just throwing it back to previous podcast episodes, where it is very much just like you have to make your own decision, and I think that's just how we grow. Um, do we want to talk a little bit about this condo purchase? Because this is definitely a hot topic on the show, renting versus buying, and I know you both have very like strong opinions on this. So, Ramit has very strong opinions on this too. And so it definitely goes against conventional, um, I don't even want to say wisdom, just culturally, buying is supposed to be so much better. And he has different takes. So I'd be curious to hear both of your takes on this, what you think renting versus buying. Rachelle, do you want to take this first?
You go, yeah, you go ahead, Rachelle. Jump right in, but you go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that I think I love that you like pause on the word of like conventional wisdom, right? Because it's more like trite financial advice, where I really believe that we are in a stage in an era and have been for a long time, in that we have financial advice that is repeated over and over. And to me, it's like, what's safe for the lowest common denominator of the population versus what's actually in your desire, right? Like, what things do you actually desire versus like what society will tell you is a successful acquisition. And I would also say this is a great place to question who is benefiting from you believing that buying a house is the best decision you can make. Like, is it you, or does somebody actually get a profit off of you believing that?
So good. So just to jump on to what you said, because I 100% agree with that, right? It's not that, like, from my perspective, it's not that buying a house is wrong and renting is better. It's not about, or vice versa, that buying a house is better, renting is wrong. It's really about what makes sense for you and your lifestyle and your priorities. So like when we're talking about the rich life that you want to create, what aligns best with you and your vision? And I love that Ramit talked about how he could afford to buy a house, but he chooses to rent because he values flexibility. And that is something that's so aligned with me and my partner and the choices that we've made for over the last decade that we've been together, is that we've chosen to rent because renting has just provided us with so much more freedom and flexibility. We've moved cities a few times, and we've been able to just kind of like end our lease, pack up and go, and not have to worry about purchasing and buying and selling rather. And so those things have worked like best for me in my life. And also, it's taken kind of me examining the beliefs that I had about home ownership or about working towards that as a goal to be like a successful adult, to be able to make maybe this unconventional decision for myself and my family at this stage. But also, I will say that now that we have a child, I think that our priorities are shifting and changing. And we are talking about, hey, maybe it would make sense for us to buy a house, because instead of the flexibility that I've really been valuing over the last decade or so of my life, I think stability and having a set place and a home for my child to grow up in is a bit more important. So it's not about what's right or wrong. It's really about, what makes sense for you in your life. But I think so many of us have been conditioned or socialized to believe that a house is that box we need to check on our way to success. And if we never check it, then we never truly meet the successful adult vision that we think we're supposed to be working towards. And it's really unfortunate, because I think a house can sometimes be a really negative purchase for some people. I don't think it ends up being as valuable and rewarding and even financially prudent as some people have maybe jumped into it believing.
Yeah, that was definitely my experience of home ownership. I've largely been a RVer for the last 10 years, but there's these 2 years in there where during the pandemic, we're like, we should buy a house. This is what we should do. That's the safe thing to do. And that really felt like in the moment, like everything else is unpredictable, but here's this very predictable thing that a lot of people do. Maybe we should do that. And we realized really quickly it was not a good fit for us like we also value freedom and flexibility, and it didn't align with us. And when we could, we did sell and we got back on the road. And then it was very much just like, this is home to us traveling full time. But I agree with you. It's not like one was right or wrong. It was just more aligned with what I and what my husband thought was like, felt like the rich life to us was traveling and having a lot of new experiences. What I love about this call is all three of us are in different situations. Rachelle, I know you're a homeowner. And then, of course, Natasha, you just said that you rent for now. And it's just three different examples. And I don't get a sense that any of us are just like, I don't know about this. We're not doing it right. We're not like doing the home ownership thing. So it's
Yeah,
cool to see.
absolutely. And just to share like part of my experience. So I bought my first house, I believe I was 23. I had my daughter when I was 19. I had two stepchildren that were 2 years and 4 years older than her. And I was able to pay off, like my original goal when I was younger was I wanted to pay off my house by the time I was 50. And I did pay off the first house with the first mortgage by the time I was 32. And went through an unexpected divorce in 2018, sold the house, and it was up to me. Like, do I rent now and live a more like freedom, flexibility lifestyle? But I have a dog. My daughter was still living in the area, and she wasn't like ready to move on. And I was looking for places to rent, and I wasn't really finding a good fit for me. So what I would say is like, I bought the house for emotional reasons, not for financial reasons. So, and again, that goes against a lot of conventional financial wisdom. Is like, oh, you must have a house, and oh, you probably have a house because you're a money coach, and you think like, no, actually, right? As Natasha says, it's like, it's about my values and my priorities and lining those up. And so I never think it's wrong to buy a house, but I will say I see my clients sometimes trading the things that they think that the house will bring them, right? So in pursuit of the house. So what I mean by that is when I ask my clients, what is behind, like, what is it you want? And how do you think you'll get to feel? What do you think your life will look and feel like when you have that thing? And they'll say like, oh, I want to have like family dinners, and I want to have like a lot of memories in the home. But then as they're working and saving to buy a home, they'll give up all of the time that they have in their home to work hours outside of the current residence that they have. So I just really want to point out the house and the acquiring of something is never the thing. It's always how you want your life to look and feel like, and how can you bring more of that into the life that you already have. So really being aware, what am I trading for this future vision of what I think my life will look and feel like, and what do I already have access to? And then next thing I would say about that is I actually do, because I'm like a spreadsheet nerd in like the worst way, but I actually did keep a spreadsheet. And if you looked at what I bought my first house for, even though I paid the house off early, which means that I saved a ton of money on interest, I broke even though it looks like I made a big profit. There's all kinds of things that go into owning a home that can really leave you breaking even when it looks like you made a big profit. So taxes, homeowners insurance, like those things, you don't get that money back, right? Like you just have to have it in order to have the house. So I really love the way Ramit talks about, how did he say it? If either of you remember exactly, but it's like rent is the highest that you will pay, right? It's the top end of what you will pay. And your mortgage is the low end. Like it's pretty unpredictable. You have to pay at least that much, but it's going to be much more.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what he said. That resonated with me because that was my experience for sure. I mean, I felt like I was just working to pay for the home that we had. And that didn't feel good to me. While you were talking, Rochelle, I was thinking about Danelle and Monique. One of their big goals is to purchase a home. And I really do think for them is that they are thinking more so about what they want to happen into the home. They want their children and grandchildren to come and have all of these memories. And I truly think that they could have that renting or buying. Like they could create that wherever they are. And I don't I don't know if they've stopped to think about that really. I don't know if it comes up in the series at all. Um, Not that they should or shouldn't, but it's just like how does that fit into all the other things that they want in life? And does it make sense? I mean, Monique has this beautiful business that she just started for herself. It's like she may want to invest in that at some point. We'll see. So, but it is interesting to think about because most people that you would talk to would be like, well, of course you should buy a house. That's an amazing investment and everybody should do it. And that should be the goal. And it's like, suddenly we have this different perspective on it. And then we get to talk about it in a different way, which I like.
Yeah. And I can't tell you really the amount of shame and really the amount of shame and disappointment that my clients who don't own homes have about not owning a home. And I just want to say, is that really the metric that you want to use to decide whether you're successful and like living your best life? Maybe it is, but also be really clear of like why that is. And if it's trite financial advice that is like repeated, or because like your uncle's going to ask you about it at Thanksgiving, you might want to just like dive into it a little bit and re-question that.
And I loved that Ramit actually broke down. I think the example was with Sofina, where he showed how much of her mortgage payment was actually going towards the principal and how much was going towards interest. And she was spending more on interest than she was on the principal, which for most people in a home ownership relationship, for the first 10 years or so, you're actually spending more on interest than you are on your principal. And until you actually look at the numbers and break it down, like I would say people don't realize that. They don't realize that sometimes they can be spending almost the same amount of their cost of their house in interest over that 25 or 30-year span. And I think that is a real eye-opener when people start to see that. So I really love that he showed that, because not to bring it back to Sofina, but I know we're talking about Danelle and Monique, but I wanted to just mention that like she thinks that now that she's bought her house at such a young age, it's like a good investment. It's like her being a successful adult, and then selling it would be a failure on her part or her making a mistake. But it's so interesting because it's like, yeah, but then what if the numbers are showing us the opposite is true? And oftentimes people are unwilling to look at the numbers to make a decision. And instead they're kind of just like, oh, well, this like looks better, it feels better in this way without even examining it a bit closer. And it's so funny because like it's possible that selling a bad investment or an investment that isn't working out for her or something that, she doesn't want anymore is actually a great learning and an example of her growing and changing and developing and not failing at all. But the fact that she kind of just views it as a failure, I think is so telling, because every one of us have been taught or told that like having a home is that metric. It is, how we can measure ourselves. But when the numbers tell a different story, are we willing to reevaluate that decision and make a choice that maybe might look a little bit different to other people?
Yeah, and I really think that this was almost the theme for these two episodes. Almost all the episodes is like, hey, let's just look at the math. Let's just look at the actual details and the facts and then take a step back. And if you're willing to see and like just check your thinking on what you're currently at, does it make sense for where I want to go with my life? And if it doesn't, are you willing to make a different decision and let that be okay? And that's the hard for a lot of people. I
This
feel
is
like we
where
could, yeah.
I
Go,
was
no,
going
you
to
go
say,
ahead.
this is where I think that our relationship with money shows us our relationship with ourselves, right? Like, so when we look at the numbers, what comes up with that for us? When we're faced with a decision like selling our house, what are we faced with in terms of our thinking? And that shows you how you're thinking about yourself. Like, Sophina thinks that this is a failure, and she's like, well, I don't want to be a failure. Why is that now that she is a failure, right? Like, where is she not having her own back and treating herself with kindness and high self-regard and love, and respecting kind of her journey as an adult who's learning and growing along the way, instead of just making it a blanket statement like, I'm a failure. This is as if she's like now landed upon like this step of the journey that is just like bestowed upon her this like failure status, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, exactly. Like she can make a different decision. It doesn't have to mean anything about her. And I think that's just so much pressure she's putting on herself. It's just like, hey, you bought a thing and maybe you made a different decision. I don't know. I think she sticks with it, but we'll see. I feel like we could talk forever here, but we're at time for today. Do you want to each give one last thought before we wrap up? Natasha, do you want to go first?
Totally. So I guess kind of for me, what I'd like to just leave you all with is the idea that you're allowed to make decisions for yourself however you see fit, right? It's like, question the conventional quote unquote advice that you get, question what other people, maybe your parents or teachers or friends have kind of taught you is important, and start to question whether or not you actually think it's important. Because in reality, when we're talking about this like dream for your rich life, it's really about you and that vision for yourself, and having the confidence to allow yourself to believe that what you want is valuable and has merit, right? It doesn't have to just be about the show for other people or what other people think is better, what other people want. Like, your desires, your thoughts and opinions, they matter too, and they hold them in high regard, right? Allow yourself to explore them and dig into them. And I think that is how you start to create and cultivate your rich life. It's like allowing yourself to do the unconventional or different thing and let that be okay, and just see what happens if you take a different path.
100%. I echo all of that. And I just have to like go back to Danelle and Monique for a minute, because I love, love, love them. I love their relationship. I love how even when conflict comes up, they're sort of like light and playful and a little bit teasing, but also direct. If you go back to that scene, I believe it's episode 3, where Monique asks Danelle, like, how do you think it's going? And he's like, oh, I think it's fine. And she's like, I think you spend more frivolously than I do. And he's like, I do not. And she's like, when you're willing to see it, then you will be able to change it. And I thought she did such a beautiful job of being really direct and not mean at all, right? Like, it wasn't nitpicky. It was just really direct. I just think they show so much love for each other. And I think they do a really great job of communicating. So if you haven't watched the episode 3, I think they do a really great job in having some direct conversations. And you can even see there's a point where it's like, it spikes where it could be conflict. And she says, never did I ever say that we're in this position. I own this with you. And I want to go further. I want to go farther with you, right? I want you, like, I want to be in this with you. And I think parts of this aren't going that well. And I just want to give them so much love because I have a lot of respect for their relationship. So how about you, Lynn? Anything you want to leave with?
Well, I have to say that, Natasha, I think that you just gave us the title for this podcast. I was like, question the conventional for sure. I obviously agree with that 100%, but anything that seems to be quote unquote wisdom, if it's amazing for you, go with it. If it's not, question it. And I think that's what the types of questions that Ramit's bringing up in here that everybody's starting to think about and think about on their own terms rather than going like blindly into them or unknowingly into them because they think they should. It's beautiful to see. I just want to thank both of you for coming on here and giving your perspectives. We could talk for more hours. I could just see you're both like, oh, we're just getting revved up here. And I'm sorry for cutting you off. We'll have to just like keep going with this at a future time. But it's just, it's given me a lot to think about for sure. I am excited to listen back to this to see what I can apply to my own life and how I can, better serve my clients in the coaching world because this does come up for all of us. It doesn't matter if you make a ton of money, if you make a little money, whatever, we all deal with money and we all have thoughts about money. We all have relationships about money. So this gives us a lot to think about. So just thank you both for coming on. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun to be here, and I'm really excited to listen to the other episodes of the podcast and hear all the juicy things that you guys dig into. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. And if people wanted to find you online, Natasha, where would they go looking?
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me on my website, which is just my first and last name.com. So Natasha, and then I'll spell my last name for you, TEKESTE.com. You can find me on my Instagram handle, which is my first and last name. And also my friend Marie and I host a really fun podcast called Making Work Fun. And we talk about all things to do with work, coaching, fun, finding more joy in your life, and how to embed joy and fun into your everyday work, whatever it is that you call work. So you can come find us there too.
Yes, amazing. That will be in the show notes, all of your links, and then Rochelle's will be there as well. Thank you for both for coming on. This is such a great episode.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.